Pop quiz, who knows best when it comes to building an app? Is it you, the entrepreneur, or us, the developers? Trick question, neither. Hey everybody, my name is Zach from Yas.
And I'm Mike from Yas.
And today we are going to be talking about your app development project, what an MVP, which stands for Minimum Viable Product, stands for, and what you need to do to get it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the question that I asked in our cold open, which is who really knows what's best. So Mike, I'm going to ask you first, why does the entrepreneur not know what's best?
Well, so often people come to us with an idea. They come to our office and say, hey, I was golfing the other day and I was doing this and it's a problem. Every time I go to the golf course, I have this problem. I have an idea that can solve that problem. I have an app idea. Great. Tell me about your idea. They go through their idea. They say they've talked to their friends and their family and everyone says it's a great idea. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna build this app. But that can be dangerous because that gives them a confirmation bias.
Yeah, so this is actually one of your first red flags to look out for as an entrepreneur. Don't just ask your friends and family if your idea is great. They're going to be supportive. They're going to tell you that it's a fabulous idea. If it isn't, they're still going to tell you that it is, and that can be super damaging. So let's talk quickly about what confirmation bias is. Basically, we all have a set of beliefs that we follow all the time. We make decisions, and then where a confirmation bias plays in is that we tend to accept things that complement what we believe and agree with what we believe, and we tend to ignore things that don't. So if you can think to, last time you got in an argument, what you'll find is that the other person, even if you think they are wrong in what you're arguing about, it seems like it's really hard to get them to come over to your side. The reason for that is because you've usually caught each other in a confirmation bias where you believe that you're right, so everything that they say that's contrary sounds crazy to you, and everything that you say that sounds contrary to what they believe sounds crazy to them. This really does apply to everything in life. We look at our day-to-day, we look at our friends with what we want to see, we ignore advice, especially entrepreneurs. When you get your good idea, you bring it to people and they say, that seems like a pretty good idea, but have you considered this and this? And you sit there and you're like, well, that's not important, that's not my target audience. But you have to think of every single aspect from an outside perspective and really start to listen to what anybody has to say.
Exactly.
So the next thing is that we as developers also don't know what's best for you. Tell me more about that, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. So when people come to us with an idea, sure, we've developed apps before. Yes, we know the process that needs to happen to build an app properly, but we don't understand your industry, and we also have confirmation biases. So if you're in an industry that we've never done anything for before, we're not going to have any background knowledge about the users or the audiences who are using the product or going to be using the product. And also we have ways we would like to see things done, just because that's how our industry works, but that's not necessarily the best thing for the product itself.
Yeah, just because we think that 100% of our customers don't use the phone anymore and will fill out contact forms doesn't mean that your target audience doesn't work almost exclusively over the phone. So it's also not up to us to tell you that your idea is bad. We want to steer you in more of a direction of making sure that you have done the proper research.
So yeah, again, developers, we're not the person to tell you either.
So if you don't know the correct answer, and we don't know the correct answer as to what makes an app successful, then of course, who does? The answer to that we're here to tell you today is your end users. Now, as a kind of a big disclaimer, first of all, I'm not saying to listen to everything that every end user is telling you. You're gonna get people that have their own preferences. They'll look at your app and be like, this would be a lot better for me if it was green because I don't like the color red. And while you're going to get a lot of that feedback, that doesn't mean that you should turn it green, but you should start looking for trends. People are going to know what they want to see out of your app. They're going to know, some direction that it goes, but you can't expect them to do the inventing for you. That's your job as the entrepreneur. They need to tell you what their problems are. You need to take all of those problems in, figure out what issues people are actually having, and most importantly, which of those issues people are willing to pay to fix.
Yeah, exactly. You're the entrepreneur. Take their problems, find maybe multiple solutions to that problem, and then present your users with different maybe surveys around those ideas to figure out which one of those paths you should be taking. So it is a great way to kind of pull your audience to kind of get general ideas, not just very specific ideas like Zach said with like blue and green colors, and little details like that really don't matter as much as solving the problem itself.
So before understanding what a minimum viable product is, we first want to run some terminology past you that'll help you understand why it's important. So the first one that I want to talk about is a feedback loop. So a feedback loop, when you are creating your app, of course, before you build anything, you want to do a bunch of market research. You want to figure out what people want, what they're willing to pay for, and you want to start creating things that people can start giving you feedback on. So you take their feedback into consideration, you make their changes, you release the next version, the next feature, and then you do the exact same thing. There should never be any point where you're releasing a product and saying, this is done, go ahead and use it. There's always things to improve on, and especially if this app is making you money, you're going to want to listen to what people have to say to how you can change that to make more money. Now I'm going to turn over to Mike, who's going to tell us about iteration.
Yeah, so Zach kind of covered iteration a little bit already, but it's basically taking that feedback, building an initial version or the very first feature, showing it to users and the client in some cases, and then building off of that, making sure that piece is right, changing it, adding more to it, and continuing to iterate through that process of development to get to that minimal viable product.
Now, something called pivoting is what happens when you get to the point where you realize that your project is not necessarily going to work. This is something that is really hard for any entrepreneur to kind of swallow. You've invested so much time into your idea, into your product, and you're finding there's not a great market fit. People aren't willing to pay for it. So what do? The same thing that all of these great companies have done, and that is pivot. I actually wrote down a few examples of some famous pivots that should help you put things into perspective. So the first one is YouTube. YouTube probably would have failed as a dating service before they pivoted to be an online video. Yes, you heard that right. YouTube's first strategy was to be an online video dating service. Can you imagine if that was still the case? I cannot. Twitter is the next one. Before they became the giant of tweets and social media, they wanted their members to subscribe to podcasts. And while maybe that would have worked in some way or another, Twitter figured out that that wasn't going to work for them and pivoted. And the last one, PayPal thought that they were going to be taking payments through people's Palm Pilots. Do you own a Palm Pilot? Do you own a Palm Pilot?
I used to. I'm old though.
I think my mom had one for a while. She was like really proud. She had one of those ones that like it flipped up. She had like, this huge screen. And this is the same time I think she had this tiny phone on like this huge charger.
Nice.
Technology.
It's come a long way.
So I've got an idea. I decide I'm going to make an app. When should I start thinking about some of these concepts we're talking about?
Well, definitely right away. You don't want to spend hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars building out a product before you start, going through that feedback loop and doing the iterations to build out that product. Like I said, you can probably waste hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours, and a lot of money doing that if you don't get started on answering these questions right away.
Yeah, the trick from a lot of things that I've seen and read is that you want to be able to fail fast. So if your product is not going to work, you don't want to wait until it's ready to release to the public as this finalized product to find out that that is the case.
Yeah, definitely iterate through and find that product market fit as soon as you can.
So here's when we enter the minimum viable product. So, given your experience, what is a minimum viable product?
All right, a minimum viable product is the, smallest minimum feature set, potentially cheapest way to complete a product that is useful to somebody to use.
Yeah, keyword there being useful. Playing off that, what is the difference between a minimum viable product and just a minimum product?
Well, a minimum product is something that may not have any useful features in it. It might be really quick to develop, but it's not useful to the client. So just because you can take a feature out doesn't mean you should. A viable product is something that is useful.
Yeah, so if we take, I'm kind of sitting in front of our Let's Camp banner here. If we took Let's Camp, so this is an app, like a software that we built, how many years ago now?
Oh, over 6 years ago now.
Yeah, it's been around for a while. It definitely has become kind of a giant of features, and at times it may even be confusing to those who are coming late to the game. But if we had built this as just a minimum product where somebody can log in, sure, that is a bare bones feature, but are we actually solving the problem with that? The purpose of our minimum viable product is to make sure that we have the least amount of features to solve a specific problem.
All right, before we move on, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that with your MVP, you can actually make money with it. It can be a product that you're selling as a subscription already, or a one-off product, and you can use that money to continue to build the rest of your features and your product out from there.
Yeah, you might be thinking, of course, people don't want to use an unfinished product, but more and more that is not the case. You've got your early adopters, a lot of whom you have handpicked, and these people are excited to start using things, excited to start getting value, and more importantly, excited to help you create a tool that will continue to bring them value. So a lot of times they are willing to pay even before things are even nearly finished, and that revenue can help you continuously iterate and support your final product rather than going just like thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole and just hoping it works out in the end.
Exactly. All right, so you've released your MVP, now what? Zach, why don't you tell us what are the next steps? What are some of the things you would do to continue building onto that MVP?
Yeah, so building off what I mentioned earlier, you want to start collecting all of the feedback your end users are giving you. Again, you're not going to be trying to fix everybody's problems. You don't want to include all of their preferences, but there are kind of two main things you should look for. The first, of course, I did mention earlier, you want to see which things are coming up the most. If you have a feature request, and especially if it's like an add-on that 1,000 people are asking for and willing to pay for, absolutely put the time into making that. The other thing is something that I like to call permission to play. So if you are building a software, in many cases there's already software, somewhat like it that you're trying to get some people to come over to yours from older ones. You will find that people will ask you, your software looks really great, your app looks awesome, I really want to start using it, but does it do this thing because I rely on this for my job? And if your answer is no, and that means you're not going to convert them, that's something that you can build because you've got someone that will make the difference in whether they pay or not.
Good points. All right, so you got your product out there and you're iterating through different versions of it, but you're not seeing much traffic or traction with the product. When should somebody stop and pivot?
So that is always a kind of a complicated question. It's never going to be 100% obvious. On one hand, you don't want to abandon ship as soon as things look like they're going bad because things can turn around. On the other hand, you don't want to go down with your sinking ship if there is nothing you can do. The most important thing that you can do is continue to listen to feedback, make sure that you are checking your confirmation bias at the door. You're not just too attached to the project, too close to it that you think, like, no, these people don't know what they're talking about. I'm right. This is going to make it. We just have to wait it out. like at the end of every day, every week, whatever works for you, take a step back, write down like pros and cons. What have you seen? What have you heard? What have people said? What does your market look like? Are things changing as you're going? Are they changing for the better? Are things getting worse? When you and your team, and maybe even people from outside your team, can take all of these facts together, look at them, you should be able to kind of keep your thumb on the trajectory that you're going on.
Exactly. And another point to that too would just be investment factors as well. I mean, if you're not getting traction, if there's no really good bright ideas or light at the end of the tunnel, maybe it is time to pivot based on how far you can go with what you're doing.
To wrap up everything that we said, 1, you don't know what your customers need and how they need it. 2, we don't know what your customers need and how they need it. 3, a lot of your customers will know what you need and what they want, but not every single one individually, and that's an important distinction that you should never forget.
Yeah, so basically build that MVP. Go through those feedback loops, iterate through all the different releases that you have. Always be watching that feedback as you're iterating through, and if you need to stop and pivot at any point, if a bright idea comes up in the midpoint, being like, actually that's the problem, that can happen sometimes too. Stop and pivot at that point.
And most importantly, I will say it again and again and again, leave your ego at the door. It's so difficult to do, but once you've mastered this, everything else becomes so much easier. As an entrepreneur, it's probably going to be the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. I'm sure it's something that even we haven't come even close to accomplishing yet, but you want to keep your eye on it, work at it every single day, and you will possibly come out with something great, or at least you'll pivot. All right, that is all we have for today. So thank you, as always, for joining us. We hope you learned a little bit about MVPs and how to start your software project.
See you next time.
Take care.